What is a low cost? At its core, the low cost is more than just a car. It's an idea, born from a simple premise. You don't need to be wealthy to enjoy the thrill of building and driving your own sports car. The low-cost movement started with Ron Champion's groundbreaking book, Build Your Own Sports Car, for as little as £250, published in 1996. It was a blueprint for dreamers, a guide for those willing to roll up their sleeves, take on a challenge, and create something uniquely their own. For some, it's a weekend project. For others, it's a way of life. And for a select few, it's the gateway to competitive motorsport. But where did this movement begin? To answer that, we must go back to the man who started it all.
I'm going to just start. I'm just going to say, first off, I want to take a moment to say thank you for granting us the opportunity to have this chat, Ron. It's fabulous.
It's my pleasure.
Oh, yeah. And I've got a few questions which I have typed up in advance. So excuse me, I'm not the world's most gifted interviewer, but I have a few questions I'd like to ask. And, you know, you were kind enough at Melbourne to grant us an interview, and that was fabulous. But I've got some questions about that'll help me tell the story of Ron's life. So do you mind if I ask? Do you mind telling us a bit about your family life? Like as a kid, where did you live? Where did you grow up?
Yeah,
And then,
I grew up. Well, first of all, I was born towards the end of the Second World War.
Yes.
So I was obviously conceived while my father was on leave because he went back in the army, and I didn't see him again. Not that I remember it until I was about 18 months old. I was living with, obviously, my mother until our house got hit by a V2 rocket that good old Aldous sent over. Fortunately, we were in the Anderson Air Raid Shelter. When my mum carried me out, everything was gone. We both moved to my mother's house, my grandmother, where we lived until my father was demobbed at the end of 1945,
right,
and came home. Obviously, came home to no home, a wife, and a child he'd never met before.
Yeah. The next question is: do you mind if I ask about your professional life, your education, and how did you gain employment as in your professional career?
Right. Okay. I having grown up with my grandmother, I had in my early years I had two uncles that weren't much older than me. When my mum got married, she was only 19 years of age.
Yes.
And my uncles were 8 or 9 at the time, so they were more like older brothers than uncles. Both of them heavily into motorcycles. So from the age of being able to pick up a spanner, which I guess must have been about 3 or 4 years of age, I knew my way round spanners. I knew what a 7/16 was, a half inch, etc., etc. So I was the gopher. I was a toddler gopher. In the meantime, of course, I was picking up a lot of knowledge. My father then, with his demob money, was able to buy an Austin 7.
Oh, yes.
That's an interesting connection, which, if you remind me, I'll come back to, because there's a direct link there with Locost. Locost is run by the 750 Motor Club, and its origins are, of course, Austin 7s. So during this time of growing up, I was also helping my dad. The Austin 7 needed constant maintenance. I got two uncles with motorcycles that needed constant maintenance. I think I say constant maintenance. I think part of their pleasure and their hobby was taking them all apart on weekends and putting them back together again.
Yeah.
I don't ever remember an occasion where they weren't working, so therefore we've got to get them fixed quickly. It was a question of, oh, it's Saturday, we're not at work, let's strip one of these down. But anyway, obviously I went to school. I went to school at 4 years of age. Still living with my grandmother because my mum then went back to nursing. My father, having been demobbed, got a job as an auto electrician. The unit he was with during the war was REME, Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers. So he came out, having done the whole war, not restoring, but repairing Willis Jeeps, lorries, vehicles, landing craft, you name it. He worked on it electrically. Anyway, he'd got this Austin 7. I learned an awful lot, including being able to drive before I was 7 or 8 with cushions behind me and sitting on them. I lived in a rural environment, so there were lots of farm roads and country roads that I could learn to drive on. So all this, 2 uncles and a dad, heavily into mechanical work, it made me the petrol head that I still am. I went to school, and when I was 11 years of age, the system we have here in the UK, you have junior school, then you have senior school. My parents sent me to a private school. They had the best intentions, but I don't think it did me a lot of good, to be perfectly honest with you, because it wasn't the sort of school that did mechanical work, wood work or anything like that. It was far more academic, and I don't think I benefited really from it. Some of my mates went to local comprehensives, and I was most envious that they did metal work and some mechanical work and woodwork and all those skills I really wanted.
Yes.
But I was obtaining those skills at home, evenings and weekends with my dad and uncles. My parents then had saved up enough money to get a house, and we all moved. Mum, dad, myself, moved to a nice semi-detached house in the same area. All this is happening in Essex. Even the house that was bombed was in Ilford, which is just on the border of Essex, and so the whole childhood was within a 20-mile radius, including the school I went to. During this time, when I got to about 16, I'd got some friends, a couple of years older than me, that were members of the 750 Motor Club.
Yes.
And we decided to build an Austin 7 race car. My dad allowed us to raid his garage, where he had stacks of Austin 7 spares. He needed those spares to keep his one going. But we got a good chassis from that, various other bits and pieces. We bought an engine and gearbox from a scrapyard. And I was the one with the welding skills, which I'd learned from uncles and dads, and I became the chief engineer mechanic, the one that dealt with the oily bits. one of the other chaps was the driver. Another one did all the paperwork and administration. It was a good team.
Wow.
I got as much pleasure from seeing a car that I'd built, or certainly assisted in the building,
Right.
to see that obtain positions in racing as I was if I'd been driving it myself. In fact, more so, I think. Anyway, I left school, got an apprenticeship in with a local garage, and did a 3-year apprenticeship. Left there, and by this time I must have been about left school at 17. Met my wife, bought a car. 2 years later, I was married. We got married in 1966. And no time for race cars or Austin 7
Right.
club then, what with mortgage and new wife, and who was working. She worked for a local bank, Barclays Bank. And we used to go, again, although it was in another county, it was just the other side of the River Thames. We used to go to Brands Hatch regularly to watch the friends I'd made in the 750 Motor Club race. I then had a period of time working for myself and opened up a little garage.
Oh, okay.
I was in my mid-20s then. The usual stuff, servicing, repairs, and looked after a couple of race cars, an MG Midget for a local chap, which did very well, supercharged, meant it went up to the next class, but it was still beating people in the next class. I can't remember what the classes were, but I'd got this bug going through me of always had to have oily hands and dirty fingernails. My wife was very supportive in all this, particularly in the early years of marriage, when not only was I working on cars during the week, but I'd have friends coming round at weekends. Ron, can you fix this? Can you? I think the head gasket's gone. Can you have this sort of stuff? And for years and years of married life, she had a garden or drive. We're fortunate we had lots of space. A drive full of cars in various states of disrepair. During this time, I was also building up a small car collection. So not only friends' cars, but my own cars. And I had some very exotic machinery, but back in the 60s and early 70s, stuff that's expensive and exotic now you could buy in scrapyards. I had a couple of E-type Jaguars, not at the same time.
Really?
And I got those. And if I say restore them, that wasn't the case, but made them roadworthy.
Yes, I understand.
Yeah. It wasn't all spit and polish like Concours cars are nowadays. If you could get it through the then MOT, you drove it. You weren't worried about the odd patch of flaking paint or torn leather seats. If it went, you drove it. So yeah, a couple of E-types, a Gilburn. I think I owned all the MGs. I had an MGTC, then I went to an MGA, then an MGB, then an MGC, which was a wonderful car. Yeah. By this time, my daughter was born. Although I convinced my wife that the MGC GT was big enough for a carry cot on the back seat, she thought otherwise. So the next car was an Alfa Romeo 2-litre GTV, the early models, a nice roundy shaped one, which did have plenty of room. People recently have asked me what was the best car, my favourite car that I've ever owned, and it was that Alpha.
Yeah.
When I bought it, it was little more than beer money, or
Yeah.
weekends beer money. It had run into the back of something. It was still drivable, but the radiator was leaking because of the accident. The headlights were bust. The bonnet had a crease in it. The front grille and bumper was dented beyond repair.
Mm-hmm.
But I got it home, straightened it all out, put a new radiator in, and wasn't too fussed about the paint. There was several different colours, but
Mm-hmm.
drove that for a couple of years until, unfortunately, a drunk driver, and it wasn't me, the drunk driver, drunk driver pulled out of a forecourt in the middle of the night without any lights on, and I T-boned him, and that wrote off the Alpha. I never did have another one, because by this time they were going up in price. So, you look at the price of 1970s Alphas now, and it's silly money.
Yeah.
So then we had another child, a son, James, who you know about.
Yeah.
By the time James got to 15 years of age, I started him off on motorbikes when he was 5 years old, and the motorbikes got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then he started thinking about cars and said, "Dad, another 18 months, I'm going to be 17. I want a car." Yeah, okay, son. What sort of car do you want? Well, kit cars aren't like they are now.
Yeah.
You had Caterham. I think Dutton, Dutton, was around in those days.
Yeah. Tim Dutton.
But there wasn't these dozens and dozens of Seven clones.
Yeah.
So I didn't know anything about Sevens, apart from Lotus Sevens, apart from the ones I'd seen at race meetings.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to a couple of car shows with my son and had a look at these cars and realised very, very quickly that they were just a bunch of tubes welded together and clad in aluminium.
Yes.
So, and looking at the mechanics, the engines were available engines, in the main Ford engines. The axles were available, and when I say available, my price range, local scrapyard. So I said to James, "Look, I'll make you one of these. It'll be ready by the time you're 17. You'll be able to drive it when you're 17 and got your license." And his reaction was, "Oh no, Dad, I want a real one. I said, look, son, can't afford a real one.
Yeah.
But I don't think you'll be able to tell the difference."
Yeah.
So we set to, with him helping. I've got to say that James had inherited my enthusiasm for all things mechanical, particularly
Lovely.
from the age of 5, having his own motorcycle. And within a year or two, he was able to strip his motorbike engines down and rebuild them. Weekends with all his young pals, they used to come round. I need to point out, we live in a rural environment in a village. He'd got friends several miles away in other villages, but they could all communicate or all visit each other by going across the fields.
Yes.
Didn't have to go on the public highway, therefore quite legal to ride his motorcycle over. Well, again, weekends, the back garden used to be full of his mates with their motorbikes. "Oh, Mr. Champion, can you weld this up? This is broken off. Can you do?" And James would be beavering away and I'd be welding away. And it used to be like the pits at a motorcycle race meeting. Anyway, in due course, the Locost, as it came to be called, was finished. Now, what made this? There's several elements that brought this together. First of all, being born when my father had an Austin 7 and had to do his own repairs. Having two uncles that did their own repairs on motorcycles, which then transitioned into motor cars. So I had a pretty good grounding. But James also had the same grounding as me, because by the time he was 7 or 8, he could MIG weld. By the time,
Really?
oh yeah, he could MIG weld, gas weld, arc weld. He did it all for
Wow.
his design technology A-level at school.
Hmm.
He built from scratch an electric powered vehicle, which he demonstrated around the school playground and got a very good grading in his A-levels for it. So he's got the same
He's got the right stuff.
same enthusiasm as me. So first of all, I had that grounding. That helped. Secondly, I was involved with the 750 Motor Club. That helped. But the biggest help of all was only 2 miles away was the local scrapyard, which before
Yes.
health and safety, which has changed, it is still there, but totally changed. When
Yeah.
it was health and safety, you could climb up these cars, 2
Hmm.
or 3 cars high, and get the bits off you wanted for next to nothing,
Yeah,
and
I know.
bring them home.
Those were the days.
Those were the days.
Yeah.
And also, where I live was only 3 miles from one of the largest steelworks in the UK, which was Corby
Yeah.
Steelworks. And again, before health and safety, I could go up there and say, look, can I have a look through your skip? I want
Yeah.
a few bits of steel. And I'd get in the skip. None of this would be allowed now.
Yeah.
No hard hats,
No.
no big boots, no
Yeah.
high-vis jackets. You just got in the skip and chucked out the stuff that you wanted and brought it home.
Hmm.
All these elements coming together was how the Locost was able to come about. I think if I'd lived in a city away from all these cheap materials, if I'd lived in a city where my father didn't have space to build Austin restore Austin Sevens, and I hadn't got uncles with the space to restore and repair motorcycles, I don't think I would have had this knowledge. Anyway, the car was duly finished. During the last 6 months, I'd taken it into my place of employment then, which was Oundle School.
Yes.
I say place of employment, I still had my small garage going, but I was approached by the school and said, could you come in and give some instruction to the REME cadet force?
Oh, okay.
We have a very, very large cadet force in the school, and Army, Navy and Air Force, well, of course, saying REME, my father's connection, I readily agreed. This is a non-paid job, by the way, and I went in and taught the lads. It was just 1 day a week at the start, but taught the lads how to weld. They'd got a couple of ex-Army, well, they were still Army. The Army had given them to the Cadet Force Land Rovers, which we took apart and rebuilt, and I explained the workings. We even had a ferret armoured car, which all the lads, and by this time, I was there at this period when they changed to co-ed. We were starting to have girls in the school
Yes.
as well. So I taught all the boys and girl cadets how to drive this ferret armoured car, which was wonderful fun. The school then approached me and asked me if I'd like to go full-time and become a full-time member of staff.
Well, that was
Um,
that was
yeah,
leading to my next question is, where did the idea of
yeah,
actually writing the book come from? And I sense it comes from some of the classmates that you had.
yeah. Well, during the time I'd taken the car back to the school, And really that was for the final finishing, spraying and fitting the seats and what have you. My colleagues there, the other teachers there, they said, look, Ron, there's a book in this, you know. And I said, well, no, I can't write a book.
Yeah.
As I said to you earlier, Jim, give me spanners, give me welding kit, and I can do it. When it comes to academic stuff, I'm not a lot of good, to be perfectly honest with you. And they said, no, you should do. In the meantime, these REMA cadets had seen this, what came to be called Locost, but it wasn't then. I just said it as a replica of a Lotus 7, built it myself.
Yeah.
They said, can we build one? And I said, well, you know, it's not up to me. It's up to your parents who'd have to fund it. And it's up to the school whether they want to dedicate the space and the time to you building it. Well, these lads and lasses, we had 2 girls build Locosts, obviously went home and spoke to parents and came back. And my dad said, yes, I can. He's going to speak to the headmaster about this. So the headmaster called me up to his office and said, look, Ron, I've got half a dozen pupils here whose parents are very supportive of this build your own car idea of yours. Would you be prepared to undertake it alongside your other commitments in the school? And I said, well, yeah, no problem at all. Again, the workings of the school are such as they have periods. It's a boarding school, so they have periods, non-academic, non-lessons, where they're not allowed to hang about on the street corner. They're not allowed to skive off. They've got to be doing something. It can be anything as long as it's constructive. And by that, I mean, it could be sport, it could be rowing, it could be sailing, it could be target shooting, it could be music. These youngsters chose to do engineering, particularly car engineering. So we started up this little section, building Locosts. I'd taken one of my colleagues' advice and sent off a letter to Haynes Publishing and said, I've built this car for my son. Here's some photographs. Here's a synopsis and some drawings. Well, within days, I'd heard back from Haynes, and they said, "Oh, this is most exciting. We would like to go with this. Send us some more material. We'll send you a contract." And well, the rest is history.
Yeah.
The rest is history. During my time at the school, we actually produced, in a 10-year period, we actually produced 42 low-cost cars.
I'm happy for you, number one, but that's impressive. I mean,
Yeah.
very impressive.
They 6 of the lads. I'm getting a bit lost here. 6. I had a visit from someone in the 750 Motor Club who'd heard about this because we were getting lots of national publicity in newspapers and TV. And this chap came along. His name was Mike Todd. Lovely chap. Very, very nice chap.
I've been in touch with him, and we're going to do an interview with him.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, wish him well from me, won't you?
Yeah.
And said, yeah, this is the sort of thing we'd be very interested in. And can you get some cars ready for a race? I think we'll call it, I don't know if they did, but I did, called it a demonstration race.
Yes.
I had 6 lads whose cars were nearly finished. And I said, look, with a bit of modification, we put roll cages and various safety features. we can have these as race cars. The parents were already involved, or had been when they were younger, in motor racing.
Yes.
Totally supportive, totally supportive. Parents were prepared to trailer cars to race meetings, etc. So the first grid of 750 Motor Club, Locost Racing, had 6 cars and 6 pupils from the school driving, and certainly one other home-built car, no connection with the school, and I think there might have been 2. I know that there was definitely one. I think the 8th one, either he hadn't quite finished it, or I can't remember that. My memory's not that good. Anyway, we did this race, 750 Club, all for it. And as far as motor racing is concerned, it's just gone from strength to strength to strength.
Yeah, absolutely. I got just a couple more questions.
Go for it.
I wanted to say about building or writing the book. What was the most challenging part of writing the book? Because you mentioned that you're not a writer, you're not a typer on a computer, but you did mention that your wife, Mary, was very cooperative in letting you leave all of your papers about the house. Who did you call upon to help you write the book?
No, I did the book myself totally.
Okay.
Mary put up with all the papers around the house and stacks of photographs. But consider it this way, Jim. I had all the drawings. I had all the photographs. And during this time, I was also teaching young people. And I have the ability to communicate information and, more importantly, instructions to young people and older people who have never done something before. I learnt dealing with young people, including my young son's friends when they came round to fix their motorcycles. You don't say to someone that's never held a screwdriver, "Oh, go and get me a Phillips screwdriver," because they'll come back 5 minutes later and say, "Who's Philip?
Yeah.
I can't find him." No, that's the one that's this shape. So I never, any requests I made or anything I wanted them to do, I would say, "Go and get me a screwdriver. It's got like a cross on the end."
Yes.
Or you'll see several screwdrivers. I want the one with the flat end. So I had this ability. I still do it, unfortunately, because I can say this to people our age, Jim. "Oh, I've got one in the garage. It's the one with the," and they look at me as if, "I know that. You don't have to tell me that." So with the if you open up a copy of the book, it's just, I'd like to think it's like I'm talking to you. How you do it?
Well, that's what I found, because I do have a copy of the book,
Right.
of course,
Okay.
because in my own build experience, I of course bought your book thinking that, gosh, maybe I could go ahead and build it. But in truth, and this was leading up to my next question, is I held back from building a low cost, and I built a low cost kit for my 7. But that leads me to my question. For someone who is starting out with no prior experience, what would you say is the most important first step in beginning a car building
the first
project?
step, read the book thoroughly. Pick a small component. That small component might be the 4 trailing links that go from the chassis to the axle. They're very easy to make. They're round tube. The instructions and drawings are all there. Make those. When you've made those, then make the panhard rod, which is exactly the same construction process, but a bit longer. And then attack every component one at a time.
Right.
Don't look at it as a whole. You must never look at it as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And it's if you look at it as a whole, it's daunting.
Yep.
Break it down into component parts. Now, if you break it down into component parts,
Mm-hmm.
you will eventually get there and have built the whole car and develop skills along the way.
Absolutely.
This is the end of part 1 of our Ron Champion documentary. It was a wonderful opportunity to interview Ron, and I hope you have enjoyed hearing Ron tell the low-cost story in his own words. There are 2 more episodes coming, and we will be bringing them forward in a timely manner. The full documentary is available now for our channel members. In addition to the full video presentation, we have a full variety of multimedia on the story that will help expand on the low-cost story. In our linked document, you will find a full write-up on the low-cost story, more video on low-cost pioneers, build stories, a photo layout on Ron's cars, how the low-cost championship got started, and much more. We have wanted to provide extra value for our channel members, and this is an example of the kind of exclusive content that 7 Spot will be bringing forward.